We should be fine for now.
My name is Dr. Rahmanara Chowdhury. I'm the course lead for the BA and the MA Islam and Pastoral Care here at the Mockville Institute of
Let's try this again.
Chowdhury. I'm the course lead for the BA and the MA Islam and Pastoral Care courses here at the Mockville Institute of Higher Education in the UK. Inshallah, today I'm going to be looking at collaborative approaches to mental health care and specifically focusing on the section of chaplaincy with psychological services. So in terms of my presentation today, inshallah, I'm going to focus on a couple of things. So I'll be looking at the some communities in accessing mental health services, specifically within the UK. I'll be looking at the role of pastoral care providers in having mental health needs addressed. And then finally, I'll be looking at the intersection between pastoral care and psychological services in health provision. I think the very first thing I'd like to start off with is just a bit of a reflection really in regards to COVID-19. What I had was a scenario where one of my students was called urgently to the hospital because he was doing voluntary and pastoral care there, voluntary chaplaincy. He was required to go in so that he could get a will signed by a patient who had COVID-19. It really made me reflect in terms of the impact that chaplaincy and pastoral care can have on individuals and how it can literally be life-saving. And therefore, what a huge responsibility that comes with. And in terms of the field of pastoral care and chaplaincy, the importance of that field and how we need to ensure that we are moving that field along with the needs of the community in order to try and cater to those very significant needs of individuals. Certainly within the UK, chaplaincy, Muslim chaplaincy in particular, isn't as well established or recognised as in the US. So we have a lot of work to do here. But I think just starting on that basis of understanding how important an area is really helpful. So the first area I'd kind of like to discuss is regarding mental health needs. So I'd like to draw your attention to research that was carried in an initiative conducted a national respondents, and they launched their report in December 2021. I should say I was involved in the write-up of this report, but not the actual data collection. And I'd just like to share some of the findings because this directly relates to how mental health needs are addressed and supported. So the very first thing, what was the understanding in terms of faith-based counselling? And it's clear that people attach faith-based counselling to this idea of spirituality or a spiritual or religious approach, recognising the individual's emotional, spiritual, psychological well-being within a religious and spiritual framework. This idea that it integrated to ensure that they were better understood, which therefore had a result in terms of increasing their trust in the process. And this idea that Islam is basically interwoven with their sense of self, and therefore also with their healing and recovery process. So when you look at faith-based counselling, and this is what it's how it's understood, then actually 69% of respondents said that they would recommend faith-based counselling due to how it intertwined with their identity and sense of self and their healing process. In terms of some of the barriers to accessing mainstream counselling, 84% of respondents said that Islam played a big part of their identity, and that they would like, that they wanted it to inform the counselling that they received from mainstream services. And yet 44% felt that their faith-related issues were not dealt with through mainstream counselling. And 1 in 5 people stated that they felt judged or dismissed as a Muslim by strict or formal counselling. So what you really get from these two slides is this idea of faith-based counselling and faith-based interventions in regards to mental health needs being really important for Muslim communities, but that actually this wasn't being recognised firstly, and therefore if it was not being recognised, then actually it was not being catered to either. In terms of mental health mosques and Islamic centres, some of the barriers to accessing services were specified as concerns around confidentiality, being judged negatively. So this idea of if you reach out for help, then is it a reflection of low iman or poor iman? The idea of questioning professional training of practitioners, you know, where they are at adequate levels, did they have that professional training behind them? And then also the lack of inclusivity and accessibility of such services. There's already an issue around mosques and accessibility for females anyhow, but certainly within mental health, there was this issue was also raised. And actually what respondents raised was that they did not necessarily want mental health services to be based within mosques and Islamic centres. However, they did seek the softer kind of spiritual support services within mosques and Islamic centres. So things like the reminders, the study circles, the other kinds of gatherings, informal gatherings, and structured courses as well. All of those things were deemed to be part of healing, part of recovery, and therefore not necessarily specifically mental health specific. However, they did contribute to the healing process in terms of mental health needs, which was really interesting. So ultimately, what this research kind of showed was that for people to have adequate mental health support, so Muslim communities to have adequate mental health support, it needed to encompass their Muslim identity. It needed to be underpinned by the idea of Tawheed being the ultimate attachment, so this connection with Allah, this connection with their creator, and all of that needed to be encompassed within a religious framework. And when you had those ingredients, then actually you had a recipe and a method and manner which was potentially going to be really effective and related to individuals from Muslim communities. And this is essentially what this report was demonstrating. So in terms of this Islamic identity and psychological support, the idea of these two being intertwined, this is obviously supported by wider literature. So I've just written down some of the academics and researchers who are working in this area and some of the work that they've produced in relation to this. There is lots of work out there. There's potential for lots more to transpire over the coming years as well. And obviously we've got a huge heritage, rich heritage to draw upon with this. And what's coming out is this idea of working from a place that individuals can relate to, and is basically foundational to who they are. That if we don't accommodate this within mental health services, then actually we're going to have very limited impact in terms of being effective and being supportive and catering to their needs. So now it takes us to the point of thinking, well, how can these needs be accommodated within pastoral care? What can we do? How can we know what community members are saying, we know what they want, but how can we actually adopt this within pastoral care and chaplaincy? So a couple of studies where I've seen this happening, basically. The first one is some work carried out by Dr. Tariq Bawan. He is a chaplain at a high secure prison here in the UK. For his PhD, he developed a rehabilitation program for Muslim prisoners who were serving prison sentences related to radicalization. So this program is theological based, but it also has a recognized certificate level qualification with it. It's delivered side by side with psychological services. So whilst individuals who are on this program complete this program, they also have separate psychological services supporting them with other areas. It's based on the psychology of change, but from the position where the client and their theological identity is at the core. So it's looking at, well, where is this client and how can we work with them based on where they are? And therefore the frames of reference are relevant to that client and also in relation to the sentence and the offence that they are serving time for. I won't go into the complete details of the program and how it works. That you can have a look at Dr. Awan's work with regards to that. I put the references on the last slide. But again, you can see what's happening here is you've got theological-based interventions looking at the psychological needs of individuals. It is for a very specific reason. You know, it's got a specific purpose behind it. But equally, it's looking at their psychological needs, it's looking at their spiritual needs, it's looking at their theological needs, and it's all within the context of how can we better support and engage individuals with their mental health needs. So that's a chaplaincy-led provision. So that's one case study I just wanted to draw your attention to. The second case study is where you've got active collaborations between psychological services and chaplaincies. So this is where you've got chaplaincy and psychological services working hand in hand, working together basically. So consulting each other on a range of topics. They might be both practical and theological based. And they also include clinical and forensic cases and forensic and clinical contexts as well. So this idea of just consulting with each other in terms of the work and the conversations that take place, the interventions that are also take place. How can both chaplaincy and psychological services consider the needs of each area, and how can they work together? How can they input into the working methods of each area in order to give the best output and the best, try to cater to the best of their ability to the needs of the individuals that they're working with as well. So that's the second model that I wanted to draw your attention to. So essentially, what I'm seeing from within the different settings that I've witnessed with the chaplaincies that I've spoken to, with the existing research out there and where I see the research going in future as well, is this idea of psychological services working in collaboration with chaplaincy. I've shown you two examples of how that might work. There are obviously lots of different models of how that can work. And again, I think this idea of having flexibility within those approaches and considering being open to new ideas and being open to new ways of working. And once you have those collaborations working effectively together, essentially what you will get is that tailored mental health support, really thinking about the client who's receiving that support. What are their needs and how can we best support them, but not just doing it from one perspective, actually taking that collaborative approach that can give the best of both to clients in need. So this brings us to the issue of, well, what are we doing in terms of chaplaincy and pastoral care training? And I'd just like to draw your attention to some of the ways we're trying to approach this within the Markfield Institute of Higher Education here in the UK. So what we do within our BA and our MA programs is we try and teach contemporary issues alongside the theology of pastoral care as well. So we look at issues like trauma, attachment, domestic violence and abuse, spiritual abuse, addictions, counselling methods that are informed on faith foundations, different methodologies for counselling. We take all of these things and we try to unravel it for our students. A lot of them are already in some sort of voluntary chaplaincy position. Some of them might already be in paid employment within chaplaincy. So what we're doing now is they already have, a lot of them already have the theology. If they don't, then they have a bit of a pop-up in terms of the theology. But actually from the pastoral care perspective, we try and bring in the mental health issues, we try and bring in the psychological perspectives and equip them with that perspective so that when they then go back into the workplace, hopefully, inshallah, they will be better equipped to develop these collaborations and work with the wider care teams in order to provide better and more tailored mental health support to their clients. From the other perspective, what we're also doing, and this is based around my doctoral research, is looking at specific areas. So within this area, we're looking at domestic violence and abuse training for mainstream psychological services. So within my doctoral research, I highlight the role of faith in terms of understanding how DVA is experienced for people at a community level, and then how faith is utilized within the DVA trajectory in order to support people out of abusive situations or to cope or with healing and recovery. So we look at that on many different levels. We're currently looking at providing training to various training providers. That includes perinatal units, GPs, domestic violence educators, and police services as well. So we're taking this training to these different training providers and demonstrating to them how they can utilize this within their services. And what it actually does is it basically provides a platform from which clients or patients can directly input their needs. So it gives the client and the patient, it empowers them to say, this is my situation. This is how you need to understand it from my perspective. This is where faith comes into it. And this is the kind of support I need. So it's not necessarily for the healthcare personnel, for example, or whoever is supporting that client, doesn't need to have all the answers, but it's about facilitating an understanding of what's going on for each individual, and therefore connecting that individual with different networks, with different support systems, in order that their mental health needs can be met. And so the natural thing is that actually within this, there is a potential role for pastoral care provision alongside other support services as well. So really within both this slide and the previous slide, what I'm saying is there are different ways to try and embed this kind of training within chaplaincy and pastoral care. One is in terms of working with chaplains, but the other one is also in terms of working with existing services and almost getting the two to meet in the middle. So really just in summary, I guess what I'm saying is this idea of holistic mental health support for individuals from Muslim communities really needs to take account of their identity. This is ultimately what individuals are calling for. This is what they want. This is how they feel that their health needs will be met. So within that, then it needs to be recognised that their ultimate attachment is in relation to Tawheed and that connection with the Creator. It must take into account their Muslim identity, and it must be within a religious framework in order to have effective mental health support. And the idea of psychological services and chaplaincy working in collaboration in order to provide this model is essentially how you're going to get tailored mental health support. And that is of this presentation. In regards to some of my work around domestic violence and abuse, just going back to this slide rather, inshallah, I do hope to have a paper out soon on this one. I'm happy for this to be shared with anyone who's interested. You can contact the organisers. But just to say, really, I think there's lots of potential in this area. I think the advantage is that we can really be flexible about how we approach this and how we adopt this, and think creatively and think outside of the box. So how can we get these collaborations going? What can they look like? There doesn't have to be a fixed form, but actually if we put the communities that we're serving at the centre of this, then inshallah we can find creative ways in order to meet those, to meet mental health needs and to provide that tailored mental health support. I think I'll stop there. Inshallah, I hope that was of benefit. And I'm sorry I can't be there with you in person to take questions. If there is anyone who wants to reach out, then please feel free to contact the organisers, and I'd be happy to speak to anyone further, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Hello, everyone. Our next speaker would be Dr. James Jones, the Executive Vice President of the Islamic Seminary of America. Can everyone hear me now?
Yes.
Okay.
We can hear you.
Dr. Jones, whenever you're ready.
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, kathiran. Thanks to the organizers for inviting me to speak at this 14th annual Muslim Mental Health Conference. I came to start a conversation rather than give you specifics like Dr. Chowdhury just did, and we hope that we'll have a discussion afterwards that will be fruitful on this issue. What I want to talk about is don't call it counseling. How do I move forward? Okay, so as we start off at the Islamic Seminary of America, we try to have a Quranic imperative and a prophetic practice. And of course, most of you know this ayah from the Quran, which talks about the necessity of running our affairs by mutual consultation. To me, this runs to the idea of counseling, in the sense that if you want to have a better outcome, you might consult other people. The other part of this is the prophetic praxis, in the sense that most of us know this hadith, this deen is nasiha. And so these are the two places that I come from in thinking about this whole issue of counseling as a community chaplain. It's not advancing.
You just have to click on the screen.
How
Just click on the screen.
Oh, that's gonna be
Yeah,
fine.
there's no arrows. You just click on the screen.
Okay. All right, so the abstract for this that I submitted talked about taking a look at one hand at the literature around the whole issue of imams and chaplains doing conference counseling, and also my personal experience. And much of this is going to talk about my personal experience, because many of you may know the literature better than I do, because I've been working for quite some while as a chaplain and also working with imams in the community setting. And so much of my work is based on the one hand, working in the inner city masjid near where I live.
Has he published? I don't know, man. I'll find out right now.
I thought they weren't over here.
So on the one,
Can everyone mute? Thank you.
there's no other ways except here that I could advance this.
No, you just have to click on the screen.
Okay. So anyway, there are two areas that I'm going to talk about, working in the inner city Islamic Center and a mid-sized urban jail. So why don't we get started and see if I can figure out how to advance. Okay, so where this idea came from, where many of my ideas come from, I'm a professor, and we, myself and chaplain Imam Bajwa, and I taught a course last fall called Imam and Chaplains Functions. And part of the course is taking a look again at the literature in the area and having people think about from their own personal perspectives how they function as a chaplain and how they function as an imam. And of course, we came across the whole issue of counseling. And so during our discussions about that, we came into a situation where we were talking to people about this whole issue of counseling, what Muslim chaplains do, what imams do around counseling. And as it turns out in our classes, we get into deep conversations about these issues. It suddenly struck me that what we would call counseling, at least in my experience, wasn't really counseling at all. Okay, so the first place that I want to talk about is my work. I've been working as a volunteer chaplain at the New Haven Correctional Center for, I don't believe it, over 40 years. And the word counseling is used when I go up on the blocks and talk to people. And this is a very uneven, you can imagine, because this facility is a facility that has people who are either short-termers, right? They're on the way out back in the streets, or they're in pretrial detention. And so this counseling that they get is kind of haphazard. But at any rate, I used to go up on the blocks. I don't do it as much anymore because I don't go in as much anymore, and sit down with all kinds of people, ranging from people who had anxiety about just getting out, and people who were triple murderers who were thinking about their guilt around this. And this was a wide disparity that I had to deal with in that facility. Okay. So the other setting, if I can advance it, is Masjid al-Islam at 624 George Street in New Haven, which happens to be around the corner from where I live. For the past 20 years, people from this community have sent me people. The first, about 20 years ago, the first people were sent were a couple who were having problems. And I was told the Imam at that time had tried Quran and Hadith, they need counseling. And so, okay, I said, I'll try to do it. And so since then, people will come to me for, quote, marriage counseling, pre-marriage counseling, and sometimes family counseling. And quite frankly, I thought nothing of it because people would refer them, they said, do you do marriage counseling? I would say yes. Okay, so I did that for about 20 years. I'm having fun with this. All right, so one of the places that I learned about what I should do in these situations at Yale Divinity School, where I took a Master's of Arts in Religion, and I got exactly one class in family counseling. Exactly one class in family counseling. We'll get back to that in a minute. The other place I went is used to be called Hartford Seminary, Hartford International University, now for Religion and Peace. And I took a doctorate of ministry degree, which is a professional degree, really. It's not a research degree. And throughout my term for the doctorate of ministry degree, I got exactly 0 courses in counseling. And mind you, many of the people get a DMin from different places, and they put a shingle out and say they're pastoral counselors, okay? Then the next point, if I can move forward, okay. I'm sorry about this, folks. I just didn't anticipate not knowing how to do this. All right, so along the way, I started reading. I'm a bibliophile, so I'm gonna give you a series of books, and then I will get to my point here. Understanding Muslim Chaplaincy, some of you know this book. It talks about us actually in the United States. I was interested to hear Dr. Chowdhury say we were ahead of the UK. I think it's the opposite. And besides, they had this book before we had Mantle of Mercy a few years back, and we're in chapter 7 of this particular book. And I said, if you're calling yourself a counselor, you should at least know what the field is and what was going on. And this book is very important to understanding of that. All right, next book, please, if I can get there. Okay, I skipped one. All righty.
You can go back with the arrows, but you can't go forward with the
Oh, fun,
arrows.
fantastic.
You can, once you see.
I
You
can?
use the arrows.
This is too much fun. Okay, the second book is Counseling Muslim by Dr. Mona and Dr. Samara. This is a book that if you're calling yourself counseling, you should at least listen to or read about what some people who've been actually trained clinically are saying about it. Because in this particular book, it gives you a good outline of what clinical issues are, how to do assessments, and the like. Again, I'm picking these books up because I'm a bibliophile and I'm doing so-called counseling in the jail and so-called counseling at the Islamic Center. And the next book, which I recommend highly, is by a friend of mine called Dwelling Tranquility, which puts together Quran, Hadith, and he was trained as a marriage and family counselor. And he put the 3 together And I think from my perspective, it is the best book in the field. Okay, so the other thing I would recommend for all people who call themselves doing counseling and they don't have a formal clinical background, there's something called mental health first aid training. It's for youth and for adults. The seminary has done several of these sessions in different places in the United States. You can now do this online. You can, I think you can go for half a day or a day. I haven't done one. I'm a certified mental health first aid trainer, but you can now do this online. Again, my point here is that if you're going to call yourself counseling, you should know something cognitively about it, and you should know something about the parameters that you should try to stay in. But on the final analysis, so I said, don't call it counseling. If you're an imam or you're a chaplain and you haven't had formal clinical training, don't call it counseling. I say, how about calling it personal development, which I don't think is problematical, or premarital communication, which I don't think is problematical, marital communication, or family communication. And so this is a discussion. My question is, what do you think about it? I think imams and chaplains are generally not qualified to call themselves counselors or what they do counseling. So that's what I have to say, and I look forward to the discussion.
Over here in front of you. The floor is open for anyone that wants to make any comments or questions.
Okay.
No comments?
I think Dr. Jones, there's a question in the chat for you. Can you distinguish between an imam and a chaplain?
Oh. So when I started this whole business of trying to set some standards for people who take religious leadership in the United States of America about 10 years ago with several people, this is one of the questions that was very, very much up front. I mean, obviously, let's start by saying that even with the number of people who graduated from master's programs who've taken clinical pastoral education, there are quite a few of them. This Muslim chaplaincy or Islamic chaplaincy, I think the distinction is made in the book Mantle of Mercy. That was one of the books I wanted to reference. A book we can find you in, Dr. Nisa. It's still very young. That's one point. Secondly, we need to understand that still in many major areas in the United States of America, that when somebody in a hospital asks for a chaplain, they call the Islamic Center. I mean, it still happens here in New Haven, even though we have a number of people who train, right? They call the Islamic Center, and they get somebody who doesn't know much about, theoretically, in a sense, about death and dying, if that's the situation, or dealing with trauma, if that's the situation. Okay, so my point is that we're still a bit in the formative stages. Unfortunately, I think that if you look at the profession of imams and look at the imams of chaplains, I don't think we've settled on the difference between the two. It's the males who tend to take both roles. They graduate from a master's degree program, and we don't have any that I know about. I know there's organizations of imams. We don't have any certifying body for imams that I know about, and I've talked to a lot of people about this. I said there obviously is a distinction, and there are religious views on this that I'm not qualified to speak on. But in the final analysis, I think, again, the book you're in, The Mantle of Mercy, makes a distinction quite well. These are people who tend to be professionally trained. They often work in secular situations. They often work in interfaith situations, whereas the imam tends to work only with Muslims. and is not trained in the same way as a chaplain. But again, there are people who do both, particularly men.
No, you're absolutely right. So I want to join your conversation, Dr. Jones, and thank you so much for your presentation. So I'm Dr. Nisa Muhammad. I'm the Assistant Dean for Religious Life at Howard University, and I'm one of the fans of Dr. Jones, and I want to thank our previous presenter as well, who could not be here with us and sent her presentation. So we're just going to have a conversation here about the presentations about mental health issues and chaplaincy, and how do we interweave them. And as Dr. Jones said, don't call it counseling if you are doing both. And I think the key issue he mentioned about imams and chaplains, you know, what is the difference? That was one of the questions that came up. What are some of the differences? And I think, you know, one of the things that are significant between an imam and a chaplain is that a lot of times at my university, sometimes students want a definitive answer of, is it halal or haram? Is it halal or haram? Is what I'm doing yay or nay? And I think they can go to an imam for that. That is what the imam is for. The imam can tell you, is it halal or is it haram? The chaplain is not for that. The chaplain is to help you understand, is what you're doing, is it going to help you bring you closer to your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or is it taking you away from that? We are the ones to help you on your journey. We are the hand holders. We are the ones who provide spiritual care, spiritual guidance, all of that. We're the ones you call when you're having difficulty. You know what, I'm trying to study. I can't study. I can't focus. Can you help me? Generally, people are not calling the imam for that. Some may call the imam for that, but generally, I said, I'm on a college campus. They may come to the chaplain for that. I need to call my parents about this issue, A, B, C, or D. Can you help me? Generally, they come to the chaplain for that. And so I think there's some clear distinctions about what a chaplain does as opposed to what a imam does. Another issue was female. You know, the gender roles. You know, there are increasing numbers of sisters who are becoming chaplains. And what's interesting is that on, like, for example, at all girls schools, there are female chaplains who lead the Juma. There are no men, so they lead the Juma because they're the ones who are there with their female congregants. And so one of the things that's kind of interesting, when I became the Assistant Dean for Religious Life at Howard, and before that I interned there as the Muslim chaplain. And so some of the other Muslim chaplains in the area, the DC area has a lot of universities. One of the other Muslim chaplains in the area called me, was like, well, are you going to be leading Juma? And I was like, what? You know, what are you talking about? No, I'm not going to be leading Juma. And so, you know, I understood there was like this, you know, sense of like, okay, the sisters are taking over, they're taking our jobs. But, you know, one of the things that I think is added, well, I see it as a plus for the work that I do. I don't have the responsibility of doing Juma every Friday, which I think is a plus for me because I bring in different voices for my students to hear and experience every Friday. And so it's I think it's a plus for the work that I do at Howard University. But I think that that is one of the differences that I think, but I think the issue of psychological support that the first speaker talked about, mixing that with chaplaincy, is a wonderful model if we can do that. I'm not so sure that's an available model in every setting. It would be wonderful to do if we can in fact do that. I know that for my students, I don't know if people have heard on the news about how historically Black colleges and universities have had bomb threats at the beginning of the year. And Howard University had like about 4 or 5 bomb threats. And so this really brought my students to looking for mental health support. Because imagine you're a young person and you want to come to campus, but you're getting these repeated bomb threats. Don't come to campus because there's a bomb threat. Now, initially the bomb threats were like in the wee hours. And so by the time it was time for classes, we got the all clear sound. But one of the bomb threats was at the beginning of the school day. And we had to have the DC police on campus, you know, circulating the school buildings with the bomb dogs, making sure there were not any bombs. Now, you know, this was a harrowing experience, but it's also harrowing for, you know, Black people to see police all around the campus. It's like, you know, what's going on? And so this was the first time I had several students come to me asking about mental health services. You know, how can I access mental health services? And having students say, you know what, I went to the counseling center for mental health services, and that did not meet my needs. Do you know a Muslim counselor that I can go to? And it was because of the bomb threats. And so I did see the need for an emerging of pastoral care with Muslim mental health services, because at some point in time, young people, older people, whoever, are at a need for this kind of help. And so we have to be able to provide these services for our congregants, the people that we work with, because it's definitely necessary. Okay, so there's another question. How does the American Islamic Seminary, it's the American Islamic College, distinguish itself from, say, a Bayan? Good question.
Now, Islamic Seminary.
American Islamic Seminary distinguishes itself from, say, a Bayan? That's a good question. I mean, I think they offer differing programs in terms of their degree program. Their degree programs may be different. Their faculty is different. And so, I mean, it's the choice of who you want to study with.
I could talk about that.
Okay, good.
So Islamic Seminary of America is an institution that started in teaching in 2019. Bayan is one of the institutions that we often talk about merging with. As far as I know, Bayan's future plans are to become totally independent. But right now, Bayan is inside of Chicago Theological Seminary, and it makes a little bit of a difference of what the curriculums are different. I mean, they have to be different because the degree for Bayan comes from Chicago Theological Seminary, and the degree from Islamic Seminary of America comes from us. And so it's different. It's not the same in terms of emphasis, but for people who are thinking about going to seminary, the plus in going to Bayan is that being inside of Chicago Theological Seminary, it's accredited. We, having just started in 2019 and just really getting our 8th set of classes going, are just beginning the process of accreditation. And for those people who are looking for an accredited degree, they can go to Bayan for that. Of course, shameless pandering, we have a joint degree with the United Theological Seminary in the Twin Cities, where you could come and take some of our courses and take courses with them and get an accredited degree. But that's the difference. I think the fact that Islamic Seminary of America is a freestanding institution, Bayan is too. It's a freestanding entity, don't get me wrong, but the degree is given by Chicago Theological Seminary.
And I think the power of it is that this is giving our community choices.
Absolutely.
And the choice, but also the power that, you know, Dr. Jones deserves so much credit, because TISA was an idea. TISA was a need, and it has grown from 2019. And he said now they're embarking upon the accreditation process since 2019. And it is an amazing process, and they are doing some amazing work. So, you know, mabruk to TISA and Dr. Jones, because Dr. Jones, I'm a fan. So Dr. Jones is doing just some amazing work. And our community needed choices. Our community absolutely needed choices with different faculty, different possibilities, different classes, all of that. And so that is what, you know, TISA has. TISA offers our community choices.
We need several more seminaries, quite frankly, but that's another story.
Yeah. All over the country. All over the country.
Question here.
Yeah, I had a question about you reframed it as premarital communication, and I feel like that really puts a positive spin on it. You know? Because if you and your wife have to go to premarital counseling, then it almost feels like, you know, things are deeply wrong. You have to admit that things are deeply wrong. But when you go to premarital communication, then it might be like, okay, well, we're trying to, you know, improve things that are already okay. Like maybe. That's
yeah.
So what's your experience with, like, and how did you come up with that? First of all, I'm curious how you came up with that, and what's your experience with how afterwards you would frame it in a positive way? Like, well, how would people respond?
Okay, so number one is, again, I'm talking about people who are imams and chaplains.
Question, because
the question is that the audience member said, premarital communication sounds more positive than premarital counseling, and I would agree. And how did you come up with that, and what's been your experience? Point number one is that I'm talking primarily to those of us, that includes me, who have no formal clinical training, right? Because they're imams and chaplains who do, and I don't think CPE really prepares you for counseling. That's just me. Other people might disagree, but at least to get you further along the line. That's not it's clinical pastoral education. All right. Number two is that there are all kinds of training programs out there that one could do in order to premarital education and in order to get up to speed on this. And I would recommend those. Again, if you do a lot of it for your counseling imam, you should do that. Number three, how did I come up with this? Let me just tell you very quickly, when I sit with a couple, whether it's premarital or it's marital difficulty, I tell them that my primary role here is for you to be able to hear one another and to talk to one another. I'm not an alim, which I'm not, and so I'm not going to make pronouncements of halal haram, as Dr. Nisa said. That's for somebody else, somebody who's qualified to do that. The other thing is that I'm not a clinician. So if you got deep psychological problems that you want to explore here, I'm going to stop you and say, let's find somebody who can work on that trauma or whatever it is. My primary role is to get you to understand one another. And I often do this with my wife, males and females understand one another, because most of what I've encountered over the past 20 years is a lack of proper communication or miscommunication. So if we can get people to really hear one another, this is very, very positive. I must say that even though I'm not a trained clinician, I actually started, you don't want to know how long, over 4 decades ago, as a substance abuse counselor here in New Haven when I came here to go to graduate school. And I got trained, and then I started training people. So, but I don't call myself a clinician, because that's a particular kind of counseling that I got trained in and was training people in. But my point is that, again, the point to the imams and chaplains who don't have it, please get it, or don't call it that. And the point to the people who go to imams and chaplains that don't have it is, if they cannot tell you from a cognitive perspective why they're doing what they're doing, run for the hills, because a lot of damage could be done. It just simply can be. Does that help? Alhamdulillah.
How many in our group are chaplains? No chaplains other than myself, Dr. Jones, and Dr. Kaiser?
No,
Just left.
Mhm.
Oh, that's right, Dr. Kaiser,
Yeah.
just one. Okay. How many in here are imams? Okay. And it's true, some chaplains are imams, some imams are chaplains. They wear, two hats. How much more time do we have? I don't know if we're overtime, on time. I have no clue.
My moderator said we're fine. I don't know what that means, but we're fine.
Another 30 minutes. You're fine.
Another 30 minutes.
Okay. Are there any more questions? So Dr. Jones,
I have a hand up here. Yes.
oh,
About your work at the jail.
Mhm.
How do you work with people on guilt? I just, we talked about other things, but I'm curious about this.
So the question about my work at the jail, which I've done for a very long time, and the question is, how do I work with people on guilt? I typically don't, right? Because really, the vast majority of the people that I work with are what we call new shahadas, people who just taking their shahada and just beginning to feel their way around. I found that when I first started going in, I used to ask people about what they were in for, but it was problematical in terms of how I saw them and then what they want to engage me in around what they're in for. So I just stopped asking that and dealt with them as brother to brother. It's all men in the facility, brother to brother, and mainly giving them advice about what to do with the time while they're in, and getting ready, particularly people who've been down 5 years or more, getting ready for the dramatic change. And so in there, I do the khutbah on Friday. It's the only place I really feel comfortable because they mostly do shahadas or none at all. And on Friday, and much of this is about a couple of things. One, how you see yourself as a Muslim now that you've changed, and getting people to understand that you're still a human being and your family is still your family, right? And secondly, how do you deal with the situation that you're going to confront in the street that you left behind, just so you don't slide back into the same situation? And trust me, that is plenty to deal with in terms of that. But we don't spend time. I mean, there are counseling and psychological services at the facility, and so what I try to stay in my lane, if you know what I mean, and advise other people to do so. So I don't talk to them about guilt very much. No.
We have a question in the chat. How does chaplaincy mix with diversity officers? I mean, that's a big thing on college campuses, diversity officers, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right.
I mean, this is kind of a little joke. A friend of mine was looking on Howard University's site, and she was like, I don't see that diversity, equity, and inclusion office on Howard University's website. Do you all have one? But I was like, no, that's all we are is diversity, equity, and inclusion. We don't have an office specifically for that. No.
But I don't know about you, Dr. Nisa, but when I was working at a college, I used to be the advisor to MSA. One of my roles was to run interference with faculty, with staff, and oftentimes with the president's office for the Muslim students, because oftentimes the Muslim students, they saw the world a little differently from other people in the classroom. B, we're often from people who are Black and brown, either were born here or immigrated here. And so they have a double whammy going on. They're dark skinned and they're immigrant, they're African American. I mean, those are the issues that I encountered in trying to, getting students to speak up for themselves, because they're away from home. Sometimes they're in a different culture, and getting them, because it's a problem, as you well know, if I present the issue as opposed to them presenting the issue and I support them. And so sometimes the toughest thing I had to do in terms of that is getting them to speak up for themselves, because they were afraid of retaliation and getting a name. And so that's very tough. But I worked with, we didn't have an officer, but I worked with inclusion issues partially because of the Muslim students and also because of the African American students on campus.
No, I think that's a very good point. And even things such as food, food insecurity, and especially if you're working with like an inner city school, food insecurity, is very prevalent on schools. And so, anytime a student comes to my office and they just even look like they're hungry, or I'm like, okay, let's go get some food. They just have to even just look a little bit like they're hungry. I'm like, let's just go to the cafeteria. I will buy you lunch today. And because we have students that come from around the world to Howard University. And so I had a student who was from Nigeria, and her first year she'd done online. This is her first time being on campus. And so we went to the cafeteria. I was like, choose whatever you want, I'll do whatever you want. And she was looking at all the food, and she looked puzzled. And I was puzzled that she was puzzled. She was like, I don't know what any of this food is. And I was like, really? And she was like, really? I don't know what any, and I was stunned that she did not recognize any of it. She didn't know what any of the food was. And I was like, we got a problem here. Yeah. And so I was like, the pizza, the French fries, she was like, I'm unfamiliar with all of this. Mm. And that tough thing about inclusion and diversity. And so I had to, for a couple of weeks, try to find her native food and find families in the area that I knew to pick food that she liked, because she got acclimated to American food. And these are little things that I think that I had never even considered, how students, the international students, come and get acclimated to the university, and as you said, speak up for themselves and not wanting to feel like a standout and not wanting to get a name for themselves, as opposed to wanting to feel like they're part of the group. and try to eat what everybody else was eating or not eating at all because they're like, what is this stuff? And you're right, trying to help students be brave enough to say, I don't like this food. Where can I find some food that's from my country or some food that I like? And I think, that's what the chaplain is for, to be able to empower students in a variety of different ways. So yeah, you're right. So we are kind of like diversity officers, in a variety of different ways. Another example, we have a Catholic club, and the Catholic club wanted to know more about Muslims. And so our Muslim Students Association was speaking to the Catholic club, and one of our students I think the student was from like Bangladesh, was talking about how in Bangladesh, watching TV and movies and listening to the music and all, he learned a lot of anti-Blackness from the media and just socialization and watching stuff from America. So by the time he came to Howard University, he was wondering, why are all these drug dealers and prostitutes on campus? I mean,
Right.
why are they in school? So of course, Howard University is the absolute worst place to express your anti-Blackness. I mean, you go to American University, Georgetown. Don't do that at Howard, because you will get your feelings hurt, because it is a center of Black excellence. And so the students let him know, man, you're in the wrong place. Take that anti-Blackness somewhere else. And he said he had to unlearn what he had learned from the media.
Right.
And he was really disappointed at his own country for showing a picture of Black people that he had to unlearn. Mm-hmm. And so even being a diversity officer, we have to help students unlearn, international students unlearn what they think they know about Black people. The image that America exports about Black people is a false image and a false impression. Any other questions?
Another question here.
Okay.
How do you, what are some common issues that you work with students at Howard University with? And like, how do you help them with internalized racism? Because you mentioned like racism against them, but what about like, internalizing negative ideas about Black?
Could you hear that question, Dr. Nisa?
It breaks up.
So he said, you work with students at Howard University. How do you deal with the issue of internalized racism? And I was thinking that as you were talking, because some of the same things that the Bengali learned about Blackness, some of the Black students learned by, imbibing the media in this country. And so the question is, how do you help students deal with that?
So that's a very good question, because a lot of times we think negativity about ourselves. And one good example is that just in terms of beauty, the standard of beauty for Muslim women is light and white. That's the standard for Muslim beauty. I'm on a campus with Black Muslim young women who don't look anything like that, but they want to be beautiful and they want to see themselves as beautiful. And so we had an event called HU Hijab Fest, where it was about being beautiful, it was about being wonderful, and we invited Ibtihaj Muhammad, the Olympic fencer. We invited Halima Aden, who was a Muslim model. We invited Ayana Ife, who came in second place on Project Runway. I mean, all of these Black Muslim women who exemplified beauty and glamorousness and excellence in their field. And they came to Howard University and they were amazed at the event that we put on, and our students, a student organized event. And the students, I mean, they were so happy. The community people came, and it was an amazing event because, the students were like, okay, they felt so empowered to counter all the negative images about what it means to be Black and beautiful. And so these are some of the kind of things that we do to kind of counter the images out there about what it means to be Muslim, what it means to be Black, and what it means to be a woman, and what it means to be beautiful.
I wanted to add to that. I used to teach an honors course when I was teaching undergrad called The Power of Prejudice that focused on racism and sexism. I reminded the young people in that class is that they have the responsibility of protecting their minds. Right? You just don't watch something because it involves a quote Black character. Right? Don't watch something because it involves a glamorous woman. Because oftentimes what you're learning about yourself is not very positive. And what you're learning about gender relationships is not very positive. What you're learning about sexual relationships is not very positive. So put yourself on a digital diet and be choicey, because I remind them that the internet is not free, that the purpose of the people who give you the free internet is to sell your attention, to commodify and sell your attention. So whatever they can do to get you to look at it more is what that's about. And that's often to your own detriment. So I recommend that people guard their minds, that don't just watch anything because it seems amusing, because you're learning negative things about yourself and others as well.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, that is such wise guidance, because for young people who don't know any better or think they don't know any better, it takes them way off track. I mean, it really does take them off track. And I think something else I try to do is give my students alternative, like kind of like fun things to do. For a lot of time, this is the first time Ramadan has been during the academic year. And so for a lot of my students, this is the first time they will have been away from family during Ramadan. And so I've been trying to think of kind of fun, creative things they can do. So we're doing like a Ramadan door decorating contest where they are decorating their doors with a Ramadan theme. It could be their dorm door, it could be their door at home. I don't care what door it is. And we're going to have a cash prize contest. They have 2 weeks to decorate their dorm door, just to make it fun and exciting for them, so they can get in the mood of decorating their door. They're going to get a cash prize, first place, second place, third place, cash prize for the best decorated door, because I want them to be engaged in, this Holy Spirit, to give them something to do. We're going to have Quran reading circles. And the other thing is that I'm really working to have Tawweeh prayers on campus. They don't have to go off campus for Tawweeh prayers. And so just so that they can feel like there's a home environment for them on campus during Ramadan. Any other questions? Mental health and chaplaincy. I'm going to ask Dr. Kaiser to talk a little bit about the work that he does at Temple, because he's a professor and the Muslim chaplain there at Temple University in Philadelphia. That means you have to come off mute, Dr. Kaiser. Dr. Kaiser. He may not be there. How much more time do we have? Are we almost done?
Yeah, if you want to wrap up now, it's fine. But
Okay.
3:23.
Oh, okay. Well, I was going to wrap up with Dr. Kaiser, but he doesn't seem to be available. So I just want to thank all of you for joining us for this workshop on Muslim mental health and chaplaincy. It's a wonderful opportunity for those of you who may be interested in chaplaincy. Please look at the schools that we put in the chat, because it's an excellent profession. You can be a chaplain in so many different areas. We have chaplains. So I'm the former president of the Association of Muslim Chaplains, and this is the immediate past president. And we have chaplains in the NFL. There are chaplains in corporate organizations. Chaplains are first responders. Chaplains are at airports. They're in prisons, they're in hospitals, they're in universities, they're in the militaries. Our chaplains are all over. And so please consider chaplaincy. It's, as I said, it's a wonderful, amazing profession. Thank you so much for joining us. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Walaikum salam.